Let's talk about the Albanese government plan before the Australian government right now that should send a shiver down the spine of freedom-loving people. It plans to give itself, this is the government, the power to decide what constitutes truth and demand that tech companies enforce it on their behalf. You might as well change the name of the Australian Communications and Media Authority to the Ministry of Truth. Because under these laws, ACMA will be demanding that social media and internet companies implement the government's view of what constitutes misinformation and disinformation. And it demands that those same tech companies implement censorship of information that doesn't fit with the government's definition of truth. Now, just in case you're not sure about the difference, misinformation means something that's misleading or unintentionally incorrect. Disinformation is a deliberate strategy of using false information to trick or dupe people. But this presents real risks to anyone who wants to speak against the dominant public narrative, a practice that is at the heart of free speech and a healthy democracy. If there's anyone I wouldn't trust to decide what is fact and what is fiction, it's governments. And it's vital that as a society we retain the ability to contest the evidence before us, debate what it means, and decide whether it represents something good. That's how societies take steps forward. It's how we solve our problems, and it's how, over time, we prosper. But allowing one group of people the right to decide what is true and what isn't, and to demand that companies enforce it on pain of multi-million-dollar penalties is downright dangerous. So, you think governments overstepped the mark on their exercise of powers during COVID? Imagine what would have happened if they'd had this law at their fingertips. What if you want to question a medical treatment, particularly one being mandated by governments as the price of keeping your job? Or perhaps the so-called consensus on climate change? What if you have counter-cultural beliefs on, say, life issues? Or even something as simple as engaging with the question of, what is a woman? After all, a documentary by blogger Matt Wash on this very subject got heavy-handedly censored by social media companies for daring to suggest that a woman is someone born with female chromosomes. And that's without the heavy hand of government fines hovering behind those companies. But even if you don't care about any of these issues, this bill is terrible for the nature of our society. Without the ability to disagree, preferably civilly, we deny ourselves the process of inquiry that leads to problem solving and innovation. Censorship breeds lazy and bloated governments and permits injustice to sail below the radar. I remember when this was put on the table by public servants eager to extend their power toward the end of the Morrison government. It doesn't surprise me that the bureaucrats remain eager to get their hands on this power. To their credit, backbenchers in the then government were quick to push back on this terrible plan. But to my dismay, Labor have not. Through Communications Minister Michelle Rowland, they are backing it in. So it's good to see broad pushback on this from the coalition. Shadow Ministers David Littleproud, Dan Tehan, Barnaby Joyce and Bridget McKenzie have raised concerns over who would be the arbiter of truth as the government moves towards giving the media watchdog these powers. James Patterson and Claire Chandler have been consistent and strident in their opposition to the proposal for years. This gives me confidence that the Liberal and National Party room will land on the right side of this debate. But it will take more Australians to grapple with the threat of free speech, the threat to free speech, to overcome these numbers in the Parliament as they currently sit right now. Make no mistake, this is a terrible policy. It keeps no one safe, and it represents the engagement of a key weapon of totalitarian oppression, and that's censorship. Refusing to give governments this power is at the core of the difference between totalitarian regimes and the free societies that characterise democracy. This truly is a fork in the road moment for our country. It's vital to our very freedom and prosperity that the bureaucrats here don't win. Remember all that Labor had to say about transparency and integrity in government as it campaigned for the last election? This bill runs deeply counter to those concepts. There can be no transparency in a government that engages in censorship of this kind. There can be no integrity or accountability for a government that can rub out any information that doesn't suit its narrative. And ultimately, good facts drive good policy. But if your policy isn't good, just change the facts. There's a reason Labor wants to control what constitutes truth.